This is the OnePlus 6T, and the OnePlus 6T has been in my pocket for the last 3 weeks. Now, the OnePlus 6T has had somewhat of a lackluster appeal to me from the get-go. I mean, it isn't that different from the OnePlus 6, but the thing was, the OnePlus 6 was something that I really thoroughly enjoyed, and I thought it was an excellent phone. So the anticipation and hype for this phone was real. I expected it to do great things, and it surprised me the way it did the 6T. And in some ways it has. So let's talk about that. And quickly before I do that, let's talk about the format of this video. I make 2 videos, one with the negatives, one with the positives. I've already made one with the negatives, and you can check that out up here somewhere. I'll have a card. And this is the other one, the positives, where I talk about why I like this phone, what's right, what OnePlus is doing well, and just things that I think is really appealing to the experience of this phone and why I enjoyed it. So without wasting any time, let's talk about number 1, and that is the notch implementation. So the OnePlus 6 had one of the best implementations of the notches I've ever seen. It utilizes the space perfectly. The notch isn't too deep, so it really, all it did was it kind of hid the notification bar at the top, and it kept it clutter-free. And in most apps, including Netflix and YouTube, when you went full screen, it did not take the space of the notch. And since that space was so small anyways, it didn't matter. So it didn't feel like you had a notch on your phone at all. And in most cases, I even forgot it was there. That's really cool. And the implementation was perfect. I wish that other manufacturers would do this, especially Google, because that notch is horrendous. Sorry for that shot. But yes, the notch implementation of the 6 was so good, and it continues on the 6T as well. I was kind of initially worried because the notch is so much smaller, meaning there's so much more display there, and I was worried if it would just look like empty space, but no, it actually blends in really well. It looks good, and now when you go into full screen, the video does go into the bar up here, so it does. You could turn that off, but it does go up there by default, and you do see the notch. But since the notch is so small, it doesn't even matter. It doesn't feel like you're missing that much detail. And since it's that corner anyways, it's fine. So I think the notch implementation is something that everybody needs to learn from OnePlus. It's the best part, I think, of the software, which has a lot of positives on its own. Moving on, number 2, gesture controls. So OnePlus has now picked up gesture controls, but they didn't do it the Google way, which I'm really glad they didn't, because the gestures on Google right now, the stock Android, is not good. So what they've done is they've kind of made it without any buttons, any kind of thing. So all you got to do is swipe up from the center to go home, and then swipe up and hold for your recents. And then if you want to go back from the left side of the screen, swipe up and you're back. So it's that simple, and it just feels so much nicer. And the best part is you don't lose any space at the bottom for the navigation bar. You don't have to worry about those keys being on screen all the time. It's just always there. It works perfectly. The multitasking gesture is a little bit rough right now. That could get a little bit smoother. Otherwise, I think that this way of navigation with through the UI is perfect. It maximizes screen real estate, which I think is the biggest deal right now, because otherwise, if you have a navigation bar at the bottom, you're wasting that space, and it doesn't really go away unless you're in a full screen video or something like that. It's always there on the screen. So I like this implementation of the gestures. Not to mention, they just feel a lot more intuitive than Google's own. I don't know why. That just doesn't feel right, because you have to press on it for some things, you swipe on it for some things. It just doesn't feel natural for some reason. And I kind of like just the entire swipe-based motions a lot better than having to press it or move. It feels a lot more intuitive, as I said. Number 3, battery life is excellent. So OnePlus 6 was good with this. 6T takes it up a notch with the battery life. It's very good. It's packing a humongous battery in here, and not to mention quick charge and the dark mode, which is amazing on this. So that really helps make this battery feel like it's gonna go forever. I was using it very lightly, and I think I got like 4 days out of it. I mean, I didn't use it too much, a couple of minutes every day, probably like an hour a day. But I still got more than 4 or 5 days, and at that point, I was just like, I'm just going to charge it anyways, because it's been forever. And I can't do that with many other phones, because even on standby, they go through battery like crazy. But this, it's good on standby. It doesn't consume too much battery even when you're using it because of the dark mode. And overall, just that humongous battery really helps. Not to mention, dash charging is a treat. And even though there isn't wireless charging, that quick dash charging is fine with me. Moving on to number 4, and now let's talk about the design. So the design is a very sleek, it looks good. It's curved perfectly, I feel like, to fit into your hand. It looks good. The one thing I will say is that it is a little bit too slippery. That's why I've had to put a case on it. This is one of the most slipperiest phones. I mean, it's not the slipperiest, but it does feel way too, delicate. I don't know. The feeling of the curved glass on the back and no real, straight edge, sharp edge. A case is something I felt like was necessary on this phone. That's why I got this OnePlus carbon case. It's really nice, and I like it. And it doesn't really hide the shape of the phone. It just, hides the back, which I don't mind anyway, since I was not a fan of the color. And the biggest part is I like that it doesn't copy designs from Apple like it did before. So the 5 and 5T were just, the backs looked like a ripoff of the iPhone 7 Plus. Now this is a design on its own. I mean, it does share it with some Oppo and Vivo phones, but those are all owned by the same company, so that I can understand. But overall, this is definitely, when you look at this phone, you can say, you think OnePlus, and that's a good thing. It's got its own unique individuality to it. And just as I was talking about that navigation bar at the bottom, the one thing that I think is amazing on this phone is how small the bottom chin just is. And it's smaller than the OnePlus 6, which was it wasn't anything to complain about in the first place, but now this is shrink down even further, and I think that this is the lowest it can go without having to do what Apple does, which is bend the display like this, like it kind of wraps at the bottom, and that's expensive technology. That's why nobody else can do it the way Apple does. So this is the closest it's going to get, I feel like, and it is really well. So you guys can just see how little space there is at that bottom. Obviously, the 10 and the 10S are a little bit, they're even better with that, but this is very impressive considering that this is not even close to the price point of the iPhone 10 and 10S. So that definitely, it makes, what I'm telling you is, when you have that navigation gesture enabled and you're just looking at the screen like that, it just feels massive because of no space wasted. You got a very small notch, a very small chin, and it just feels so good. And I feel like if this is what the future of smartphones is, it's going to be a good future because it's just all glass, all display, so much content on the screen. I love it, and I really think that if OnePlus can keep going further, not just OnePlus, the entire industry going forward and killing these bottom chins and getting rid of the notch, that would be the perfect day. Moving on, number 6, performance. So while I am disappointed with the no performance for the OnePlus 6, that's not necessarily a bad thing because the OnePlus 6 is a beast on its own. It's got massive performance advantages over anything else on the market right now. It beats every single smartphone anyways. I mean, in Android, when it comes to performance, nobody can touch OnePlus, not even Google themselves. That's how good it is at performance. So I think that that's something you really have to think about because this isn't a expensive $1,000 flagship. It's not very cheap, but it gives you a lot of performance. So if performance is priority with Android for you, this is definitely the phone to go for. RAM management is amazing, way better than what Google does on their own, and overall performance is not disappointing at all. I do wish that it was a bigger jump from the OnePlus 6, but it's not the world's worst thing because the OnePlus 6 was a great phone performance-wise anyways. Number 7, and this is a double-edged sword because as I said in the other video, it's good but it's bad at the same time. So let's talk about that in-display fingerprint scanner. So OnePlus is one of the first large-scale manufacturers that's available worldwide to implement the in-display fingerprint scanner, which is a very, very cool feature. I mean, this is what we've been talking about for years. We expected the iPhone to move to it, but Apple kind of moved towards Face ID because that technology wasn't ready. And it's the first phone I've used with the in-display fingerprint scanner. And while it is super, super cool, it does come with a few issues of its own. But I think that having it on the front, I mean, when it comes to front and back orientation, everybody has their own side. Some people think that the fingerprint scanner should be on the front. Some people say back. I don't care either way. There's advantages and disadvantages to both. But with the OnePlus, the in-display fingerprint scanner means that you could really just, it's such a futuristic thing. It makes the back a lot less cluttered. You definitely don't need to implement it on the front of the screen anymore with a chin at the bottom. So I think that fingerprint scanner wise, this is amazing. Just technology wise as a whole, this is a big jump. So this is kind of like when Apple introduced fingerprint scanners on, they didn't introduce it. They weren't the first to do it, but they were sure as hell the one that made it popular. And they're the trendsetters for that. And I feel like OnePlus is going to be the trendsetter with the in-display fingerprint scanner, because some people have done it before, but now that OnePlus has done it, I think everybody else has to at least acknowledge this and kind of start including this. So the in-display fingerprint scanner, definitely something that I find very cool, and it is definitely a huge selling part of this phone because they do advertise that feature like crazy. And now some honorable mentions. They're honorable mentions because I said the same things about the OnePlus 6 and I didn't want to repeat myself too much. So some of the things I love about the OnePlus 6T are, one, the dark mode. The dark mode that Oxygen OS has is, it's the best, to be honest. It looks so good. They've got most of the menus and the settings and everything down to a almost perfect match and blend of, just having dark mode with, those accent colors as well. It just looks so good. I definitely think it looks better than stock Android any day. Now, that's my personal preference, but there's something about dark mode that really makes me like the phone a lot more. Moving on with that alert slider. The alert slider, I've talked about a lot. I love it on my iPhone. I love that the OnePlus has it. It's just such a nifty way to quickly put your phone on silent and to make sure it's on silent, because you can just toggle with your finger and know where it's at. You don't have to physically look at it to know what's going on with your vibration or sound settings, which is a very helpful thing, especially if you're somewhere, like if you're in class or if you're in a meeting, something like that, where it's not the smartest idea to pull out your phone in front of everybody, And the final honorable mention here is going to be the multiple biometric authentication option. So you still got the face unlock here, which is one of the fastest. And the way it works is, it just looks at your face, uses the front camera. If it recognizes you, it's unlocked, done. Not the most secure, but still, you got that option. And it works most of the time. As long as you're not in a dark room, it's going to work just fine. It doesn't work that well when you're, in a dark mode, or if just the angle isn't that right. Not as secure as I mentioned, but it's there. It's decent enough, and it will work for mostly the larger population. The fingerprint, as I said, is just good to have both options because, again, if you're in a dark room, just use that fingerprint. If you're in a situation where you just can't, if you're driving or something, you don't want to look at your phone for too much to unlock the phone, just face unlock. It's easy. A lot of situations where both could come in handy, and having both options is amazing. So that wraps it up. This is a pretty good phone. It's definitely great if you're coming from an older generation, maybe a year or two old OnePlus, or just any year or two old Android phone. As an upgrade from the OnePlus 5T or 6, I'm not that sure about it, but I'll talk about that more in the review of this phone. That being said, let's wrap this video up. Let me know what you guys think about the OnePlus 6T. What are your favorite features? What is something that you think is good about this phone? And if there's something I missed out, definitely let me know down in the comments below. And I would really appreciate it if you could check out the other videos on the channel and subscribe if you enjoyed the content. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I will catch you in the next one.